General Motors, GM, has implemented a strategic move to downsize its Buick dealership network in the U.S. by approximately 50% through a voluntary buyout program, according to insights shared by Duncan Aldred, the global head of GM's Buick and GMC brands. This reduction, affecting around 1,000 dealerships, is aimed at optimizing sales throughput and enhancing profits for the remaining dealerships. The initiative is also positioned to allow dealers not inclined to invest in electric vehicles, EVs, to gracefully exit the business. Duncan Aldred highlighted the positive outcomes of this measure during an online interview, emphasizing that the reduced network size would triple the throughput of the remaining dealerships. The buyout program, which has incurred a cost of approximately $1 billion for GM thus far, is set to continue into the next year. The average sales performance of the remaining Buick stores is reported to be trailing behind that of GM's GMC brand, which typically shares showroom space with Buick. The majority of dealers opting for buyouts were from smaller stores, representing only about 20% of Buick's annual sales. As part of the buyout arrangement, GM provides compensation for dealers choosing to cease operations. The voluntary buyout program was initiated last year as Buick embarked on its transition to becoming an exclusively all-electric vehicle brand in the U.S. by 2030. This transition to an all-EV lineup necessitates dealers to invest in training, tools, and special equipment. While the specific costs for this transition were not disclosed by Buick, it was noted that expenses could vary based on the size and scope of individual dealerships. Despite the shift to an all-EV plan, Aldred clarified that the decision to reduce the dealer network size was independent and primarily driven by the need to enhance efficiency. Buick is actively targeting the goal of offering only electric vehicles by 2030, contingent on customer demand and the broader acceptance of EVs in the market. Aldred acknowledged that meeting this objective would depend on evolving customer preferences and the adoption of electric vehicles in the coming years, affirming that Buick would align with market demand. As of now, Buick does not have electric vehicles in its U.S. lineup, which currently comprises 4 gas-powered crossovers and SUVs. These vehicles range in starting prices from about $22,400 to $43,900. In contrast, the brand offers hybrid vehicles in the Chinese market. Aldred did not disclose whether Buick intends to introduce or import hybrid models domestically. The growing interest in hybrids is seen as a potential strategy for automakers to meet stringent U.S. fuel economy standards, especially in the face of slower-than-expected EV sales. Buick's U.S. sales have been on the path to recovery from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and supply chain disruptions. Sales through the third quarter of the year have shown a remarkable 63% increase from the previous year's sluggish levels. Despite the recovery, Buick sales in 2022 were less than 104,000 vehicles, contrasting with pre-pandemic levels of around 207,000 vehicles in both 2018 and 2019. To boost sales back to pre-pandemic levels, Buick is banking on its newest entry, the Envista, a small entry-level crossover. Additionally, normalization of fleet sales is expected to contribute to the resurgence of Buick's sales figures, as highlighted by Aldred. Good riddance to the dealership model? It's on a death spiral, and we will all be better because of it. Absolutely not, unfortunately. Wishful thinking thought balloon. Nah, dealership owners were just pocketing generational wealth over the past couple of years by marking up vehicles by tens of thousands of dollars. They're going to be throwing that money at politicians to keep their legally mandated businesses. More likely Buick dealers don't see Buick lasting much longer and aren't going to spend hundreds of thousands to revamp their dealerships on a company that's on life support. Better to just cash out at this point. I hate the dealer model, but what makes you think it's in a death spiral? Go to the car sales sub. Bunch of delusional asshats. I really wish they're a multi-billion-dollar lobby and pretty much a horizontal and vertical monopoly in the US with friends in Wall Street. Even people who work for manufacturers and work with dealers know how they simply cannot stop their scummy behavior. We'd be better off without them, and car manufacturers would definitely be more profitable too, i.e. Tesla. That's not really what is happening though. The few times I see a post about Buick, my first thought is always, oh yeah, Buick still exists. Same. They had 1 million commercials not long ago on NBC Evening. That's not a Buick. I love that GM's Real People advertising was like, yeah, We know we have a shit reputation, so let us show you our top trim models debadged so you'll be surprised we're not quite as shit as you thought. I thought they stopped those ads after the enormous backlash they received. Maybe they didn't like Mock making those YouTube videos, so they stopping making them to kill his channel's best video series. Yeah, that dude is a rapist, so I imagine they want to get away from anyone thinking of him and their car. Oh damn. I just looked him up. Didn't realize the dude is a convicted pedophile. Gross. And he owns 3 GMs, ironically enough. That was the backlash I'm talking about. People making fun. The fuck is up with all the hats and that fucking mustache? For Buicks, weren't they mainly seen as old-fashioned cars for old people rather than low quality? I remember hearing in a Motor Week retro review that Buick was the top-selling luxury car back in the 90s among foreign and domestic brands. Yeah, to my fellow millennials and I, they were boring old people cars that looked like this. But they were also one of the better quality options from GM. So if, for some reason, GM is your only option when shopping for a vehicle, then yeah, get a Buick, a truck, or maybe a Cadillac and you'll probably have a fine, reliable ride. Avoid the cheap cars and crossovers. They didn't look fun, but those were really great rides. One of the last cars to have that sofa front seat. Yeah, same for me, elder millennial. Buicks were for the older people. Commercials so comical. Zebra Corner had hours of material. I've never seen a company try so hard to distance themselves from their core customers as Buick, trying to convince people they're not just selling cars for old people. Imagine if other companies did that. Like, you see a guy check his credit score on his phone. It's a respectable 720. Then he starts his car without having to blow into an alcohol interlock. That's a Nissan? That actually sounds hilarious, lol. Their lineup of 5 nebulous boring SUVs does in fact exist. The best ones are by Jim Carrey. Buick has had a huge decline in sales in China over the last couple of years. There has been an overall decrease in car sales, but Buick themselves have also seen their market share drop in China. Spent a fair amount of time in China 2012 to 2019 and was surprised how many Buicks were around. Returned to the same area, Chongqing, a few months back and was shocked how many China brand EVs there were. Buick is still there, but the presence seemed to be about 1/4 what it was previously. Just confirming, Buick is not what it seemed to once be there. I heard familiar rumblings from a Chinese car file I follow. I am not familiar with Buick's offerings in China. Do they not offer enough EVs? Are they not compelling choices for Chinese customers? Or is just that Buick is falling out of favor like it did here? The only reason why it was kept around post-bankruptcy was because of how well it did in China. I think it's less to do with Buick, more to do with the fact that Chinese EVs are on the come up. They're becoming serious contenders. I'd have to do some research, but I think Buick's EV offerings in China are hardly a blip in sales. I have read multiple times that the Chinese government is greatly subsidizing their domestic EVs, bringing prices way down. Can't blame them. The US threw a 25% tariff on Chinese vehicles, and there is talks of raising it further. Despite that, Buick sales is still outsold Chevy in China. Clearly see Buick still having high prestige there. Nah, it just means that Chevy and Buick are both getting their lunch eaten by domestic brands there.